Hi everybody, it's Eric Pappenfoos. It's Friday, so it must be a buy day. And we are here in Providence, Rhode Island, and I'm wearing my golden ticket. And you know what that means? It means we have just come from the set of Pawn Stars. Now, I've been sworn to secrecy. I can't tell you about anything that happened specifically at Pawn Stars. You'll have to wait until October to see the new season of Pawn Stars Do America. But I can say that we had a wonderful time. And David, was it worth the train ride all the way up from Baltimore?
Absolutely.
Okay. Who were you most excited to see? Chumley, Corey, or Rick?
I think you got to go with Chumley, just because he had the Bob Dylan experience. But it was great to see all three of them.
Yeah, we had a really nice time. They fed us well. It was on the water here in Providence. It was great. So more on that to come in the fall. But today I wanted to continue our series of books that were not good enough to appear on Pawn Stars. That's right, our second installment of books that Pawn Stars didn't want to film. And you may notice this beautiful, stately house in the background. And that is because this is the house of a gentleman, a Rhode Islander named Thomas Dorr. Here, zoom in on this great title page. And Thomas Dorr lived at the house behind me, and this is a book that was actually published in Providence, Rhode Island, right where we are in 1844. And he became governor of Rhode Island, which in and of itself is not that exciting, but more exciting, he led a rebellion, which you've probably never heard of today. Have you ever heard of Dorr's Rebellion, David?
I have not.
Well, either had I until I really got into reading about him. Dorr believed that suffrage ought to be universal. And in the 1840s in Rhode Island, the only people who could vote were male property owners. And it was a legacy of the old colonial constitution that they had in Rhode Island. And what had happened by the 1840s is that more and more people were moving from farms to cities, like we have here in Providence. They were getting jobs in factories or shops or other trades, and they didn't own property, and so they were disenfranchised. So actually the majority of men living in Providence at that time couldn't vote under the old colonial charter. And he demanded there be a constitutional convention, but there was no means of calling such a thing under the charter, so he decided just to call one himself. And they rewrote a constitution which granted suffrage for all white men, not including African Americans, which is something that very much disappointed Dorr himself. Dorr said he would accept it as a short-term compromise, but we'd have to go back and revisit that issue immediately after. Dorr became governor under this new constitution, and we now had two governors in the 1840s in Rhode Island. The colonial charter governor petitioned the president of the United States, said, "Bring in troops. Dorr is going to lead a rebellion." And Dorr, from this very house behind me, got together some of his supporters, got a couple Revolutionary era cannons, rolled them down this long hill to the arsenal here in Providence, and tried to take all the arms that were in the Providence arsenal. He couldn't get the cannons to fire, and guess who was waiting for him at the arsenal to prevent him from taking the arsenal? Well, his father, for one, who thought he was crazy, but also all the African-American population of Providence that felt betrayed and said, "How dare you forget us in not giving us the right to vote." Dorr's rebellion, so to speak, failed. He was forced to flee the state, and eventually he gets brought up with charges of treason. And this book has the treason charges in it, in the appendix. It's very dramatic. And what basically happens is he ends up in jail. And he is the first person charged with treason against the state. Do you know who the second person in American history who gets charged with treason against the state is, by any chance, David?
Benedict
It's on
Arnold.
the eve of the Civil War, so it's after Dorr. It's John Brown. It's John Brown, and you know what happens to John Brown. Well, Dorr writes this long book, and it basically defends his actions. And there's a positive that comes out of the Dorr Rebellion. Even though the rebellion fails, great African-American statesmen like Frederick Douglass come here to Providence, expose the hypocrisy of arguing for universal suffrage and then not supporting African-Americans getting the franchise. And Rhode Island's colonial charter is changed to give the vote to African Americans. And you can even see that they're starting to talk about giving the vote to women in this book, which is very, very interesting. And at the same time this rebellion is going on, lots of books get published in America. Here's another one published that looks very similar at the same time from Massachusetts that talks about the treatise on the right of suffrage. And what I like about this book is that we're starting to have a conversation of what's the role of education in terms of a voter. And this author argues that we want to have an educated voter. That's more important than anything else. And if you don't have an educated voter, that's going to be a problem. It's far more important than race. And he gives a fascinating discussion about how in the South there are lynchings going on, and those folks that are doing the lynching, they're uneducated. They shouldn't have the right to vote. And it's a disgrace. It's a disgrace to America. And this is the type of very charged rhetoric that is leading up to the American Civil War. So Pawn Stars did not want a Providence-oriented book. And it also didn't want one of my favorite books that we purchased that has to do with Boston, Massachusetts, and that is a book by Frederick Winslow Taylor called The Principles of Scientific Management. Now, if you don't know who Taylor is, I'll read you a little bit about Taylor. This is a textbook. He was born in 1856, began work at age 18 as an apprentice to a pattern maker and a machinist. And a few years later, he joined a steel company as a laborer, became the chief engineer, and then developed what he called the task system, which became known as the Taylor system, and also became known as scientific management, which is called Taylorism today, which is the process of making your factory. And remember, this Dorr Rebellion all started with the growth of industrialization and factories, but the process of making your factories more efficient. And this is a fantastic book because when you open it up, first thing you notice is it's deaccessioned from the Harvard University Library, meaning they threw it out. They actually released it as part of their gifts and exchange program. That's something that Kathy and I, when we were younger, would both go up to Widener Library. We'd get to see all the books that are being microfilmed and then thrown away. And look what they threw away. They threw away a signed, inscribed edition. There's Frederick Taylor's signature to the president of Harvard, of all people at the same time, President Eliot, talking about the process of cutting metals. And this is when he is doing that analysis of workers. Let me give you an example. Taylor is the first person, David, to bring a stopwatch onto the factory floor and time people and try and say, we can be more efficient in this task, we can be more efficient in that task. He even measured things like the most amount of weight you should have in a shovel at one time. Would you like to guess? I'll give you the over-under is 20 pounds. You think he said you should have more or less to be the most efficient worker in a factory?
I'm going to go with less.
Well, it was slightly more. It was about 21.5 pounds. But that is, those are the principles of scientific management. This was hated by Marxists like Gramsci, called Taylor just a horrible supporter of the rich and the well-to-do. It was hated by labor unions. But Taylor argued that the more efficient you could make factories, the more money everyone could share in. I thought this would be a great book for Pawn Stars because Rick could get into it, read to it, and then start using a stopwatch to time Chum and Corey and the amount of books they were purchasing or other things they were purchasing at the pawn shop. But they didn't like that story. All right, we're going to magically transport ourselves here within Providence for the funny book, and we'll be back in just a minute. And just like that, we've magically teleported to a place in Providence, which is the final resting place of the most famous author ever to be born in Providence, Rhode Island, and that is the great H.P. Lovecraft. What I like about the cemetery stone here is that it says, "I am Providence," along the bottom. And that'll lead us to our funny book for the day, which is a pretty darn funny book. It's H.P. Lovecraft's The Call of Cthulhu, in the style of Dr. Seuss, a double copyright violation. We'll just read you a tiny little snippet. When I'd spoken to Wilcox, he'd made it quite clear that the Call of Cthulhu was something to fear. Well, it's a funny book in honor of Providence's most famous author. Thanks for watching. I hope you'll watch next week and every week, Fridays at noon, for more adventures in the world of books.